Hi math students! This video is for our lesson on linear inequalities in two variables. Specifically, this lesson is going to be focusing on inequalities that represent stories and how we can graph those inequalities to help us understand the situation. The objective for this lesson is the same as in the past, where we're focusing on being able to graph solutions to linear inequalities in two variables. Hopefully you have already completed this do now question on graphing an equation, because how you graph this equation is going to be really similar to how we graph this inequality below. If you were given this inequality and asked to graph the inequality, same as the equation in the do now, we can't yet. We cannot, because to graph this inequality, we want it in slope-intercept form, same as equations. I want to solve this inequality for y so that when I do, I can see the number in front of x. That will represent my slope, and our constant, that will represent our y-intercept. So very similar to how you graphed this equation on the do now, in order to solve this inequality, we want to start by solving for y to help us graph. When we do that, we begin by subtracting 2x on both sides. That leaves me with negative 3y is less than 6 minus 2x. And then our last step, we want to divide both sides by negative 3. When we do that, same as when you were solving inequalities before, we are dividing by a negative number, dividing by negative 3. So that means my inequality sign will change. When I divide by negative 3 on the right, 6 divided by negative 3 is negative 2. And then negative 2 divided by negative 3, negative divided by negative is positive. And I can't divide 2 by 3, so I'll keep the fraction 2/3 x. Now I know that my slope is that number in front of x, so my slope is 2/3, and negative 2, that's going to be my y-intercept. That is enough information for me to graph this inequality. This is the same as what we did in the previous lesson, so pause the video and see if you can graph this inequality here. Okay. There are three things we're looking for on this graph. The first is going to be we want the y-intercept to be at negative 2 and the slope to be 2/3. So I have my point at negative 2 and I went up 2 over 3. The second thing we're looking for is what type of line. We learned in the previous lesson that because this does not have or equal to, we're using that dashed or dotted line that you see in blue. The last part, because it is greater than signs mean we shade above the line. And so notice I put this part here in green, everything up, everything above our dashed line. That means any points here in the shaded area would be a solution to this inequality. Just to give you an example of what I'm talking about, this point's really easy. This point right here, 0, 0 is shaded. That means 0, 0 should be a solution. And notice if I put 0, 0 into the inequality, 0 minus 0 is 0, and 0 is less than 6. That's true, and so it's a solution. If you put any point over here in the not shaded area or any point on our dotted line, those would not be true. Those would not be solutions. The reason we want to be able to do this skill is to help us when we go to graph situations like these. So for example, we have the story, the science club sells t-shirts and keychains to raise money. How many t-shirts and keychains could they sell to meet or exceed their goal? Over here in the picture, we see the information. They're selling t-shirts for $10 each and keychains for $2 each, and their goal is $500. The first thing we need to do is write an inequality to represent the situation. This is a skill we've been working on in this unit, so go ahead, pause the video, and see if you can come up with an inequality. So a couple things to help us write our inequality. First, it says write an inequality. That word inequality is a sign that we want to be using one of these, not an equal sign. The other thing we need is we need our variables. before we write our inequality. Here, there are two things we don't know. We don't know how many t-shirts, and we don't know how many keychains they're selling. So I'm going to use X to represent my number of t-shirts, and Y to represent my number of keychains. When I put that in my inequality, I know they're making $10 for every t-shirt they sell. So 10 times the number of t-shirts gives me that money. They are also making money with keychains, $2 for each keychain. So 2 times the number of keychains gives me that money. And they want to meet or exceed their goal. That means they want $500 or exceeds $500 or more. So that means I want to use the greater than or equal to sign and say the money they're making needs to be greater than or equal to 500. That is the first part for this problem. After we have that, the next part is going to be graphing the inequality. In order to graph this inequality, what do I need to do? It's the same thing we did up here. We're going to have to solve for y. So again, pause the video, solve this inequality for y, and then come back to check your answer. To solve this inequality, you want to subtract 10x on both sides. That gives us 2y is greater than or equal to 500 minus 10x. And then we'll divide both sides by 2. So our final inequality is y is greater than or equal to 250 minus 5x. Now it is ready for me to graph. To help us graph this, I'm going to do some labeling. So my x-axis, we know x is going to be the number of t-shirts. I'm just going to write t-shirts here. And our y-axis, we said, is the number of keychains. I'm just going to put keychains over here. Also, looking at these numbers, I see that they are quite big. So I know each box is going to be more than just one. I'm going to have to count by a bigger number. Before this video, I already thought through what's the best way to number this. And I've decided, since I know my y-intercept is at 250, I'm going to do every other line is 50. So this line is 50, another 50 is 100, 150, 200, and then 250. And that means it perfectly fits. And then on my x-axis, again, because the numbers are bigger, I'm going to make every other line 10. 10, 20, 30, 40, and 50. You don't have to do it this way. You could make every other line 100 if you wanted to. But this way, I think the line will fit pretty well on our graph. So when I go to graph, I know my y-intercept is at 250, which is right here at the top. And then my slope is -5. So that means my rise is -5 and my run is 1. That's hard to do on this graph because we're counting by bigger numbers. But the reason I chose these numbers for us is because -5 over 1, that would be the same thing as -50 over 10. I'm just multiplying by 10. Both of those are the same thing because if you divide, it equals -5. It equals the same slope. But -50 over 10, that is much easier for me to see on this graph. It means I want my line to go down 50 and over 10. So my next point is here. And I can do that a couple more times to get all of these points. Because it's an inequality, remember there are 2 extra steps. I need to choose my line. Should I be doing a solid or dotted line? It has or equal to, so that means it's going to be solid. And then last part, I need a shade. Am I shading above or below, up or down? Well, it is greater than, so I want to shade up. I want to shade above my line. So that's going to be this part right here. Now, same as before, this is helping me show where the solutions are. But because there is a story this time, those solutions mean something. So when we say interpret your solution, what does it mean? Well, all of these points in this shaded area are solutions, and the points on the line are solutions. I know that because a solid line means it's a solution, and then the shaded area means it's a solution. What does that mean for this story? Well, it means any of those points is a combination where they meet, I'm going to use the words from the story, they meet or exceed their goal. So to tell you what I mean by that, for example, if I choose this point right here, this point is 3,200 or 30 t-shirts and 200 keychains. If they do that, well, 30 t-shirts that are $10 each, that would be $300. And then 200 keychains that are $2 each, that is $400. 300 plus 400, $700. They have definitely met and exceeded their goal. That's what we mean by a solution. It's a combination where they say, yes, we did it. We got our $500. Any point down here, not shaded, for example, 0, 0. If they sell 0 t-shirts and 0 keychains, they have not met their goal. So all of these ones in white are combinations that do not work. Use that information to help you answer this last question, D. Will the science club meet their goal if they sell 30 t-shirts and 90 keychains? Pause the video, try, and then come back to see how you did. For this last question here, you could do the math like we did, but it's not necessary if you wanted to use your graph here. If we go to 30 t-shirts and 90 keychains, that's this point right here, just below 100. Because it is not shaded, the answer is no. It is not a solution, and they would not meet their goal. It has to be on the solid line or in the shaded area to mean they met their goal of $500. If they're going to sell 30 t-shirts, they need to sell 100 keychains or more. That is everything for this video. There's one down here for you to try. Thanks so much for watching, and that's everything.